Baum, the South Region Sales Manager with eGlass and from the makers of HoverCam. This is the Help Learning live stream. And as you know, each week we have a special guest on who is an expert in their field in education and technology and distance learning and blended learning, some or all of that. And we have another amazing guest this week with us, Will Stewart, and I'm going to introduce Will and have Will introduce himself in a minute. But I do want to remind you, participants, that you can sign up for notifications so that you don't ever miss one of these episodes. But we do rebroadcast them on your favorite social channels, so keep an eye out for those. Also, those of you tuning in live can post comments, and we will try to address some of those during this session. And even if you're watching a rebroadcast of this, still make your comments down below, and we will address those and answer your questions and address your comments as we go. So today we're talking about how to make math hybrid learning engaging in particular. And again, our guest is Will Stewart. Will is a math teacher at Helix High School and a Noyce Teaching Fellow at San Diego State University and an eGlass user. And so we will get to that in a little bit. Welcome, Will.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Did I call you Matt a second ago?
I don't think so.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay, Will Stewart. So, Will, what's this past year looked like for you? Just kind of in general, as a teacher, as a parent, if you're. Well,
yes, I have a parent. I have a 2-year-old at home, okay. And my wife and I are both teachers. So we were both teaching from home up until about a month ago. So that was kind of difficult. It took an adjustment. We live in a duplex, and luckily the one next door was vacant, and we were able to use that one as our classroom. So we're going back and forth, and yeah, so it was. I think the hardest part is the line between work and home life was blurred. You know, you go back and forth between teaching and being a dad pretty quickly. So that was the personal challenge. I also teach some courses at San Diego State at night. So it was kind of like all day, on Zoom and on my iPad and running Desmos activities and stuff. So I really enjoy being back in person. It really helps. And I wasn't anticipating that. I was kind of thinking, I could do this online thing. It's not that bad, but I really like being back. It was partially in person. We are now. Okay. So you are running, what's your hybrid schedule, your setup looking like with your courses? Yeah. So what we do at Helix is Mondays and Wednesdays, I still teach on Zoom. Synchronously. So that's when we deliver instruction, and all students tune in from home on Zoom. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we run like tutorial support. So the students come in and get help. And I sort of run that as like a hybrid. So I have this on for the students at home, but I also have this projecting on my screen for the students who are here. Yeah, that's kind of the model and we're in now, and I think we've got like 5 weeks left in our school year. I don't know if we're going to be going back to every day, all live. Probably not, but yeah, for right now, all of the instruction is still on Zoom like this.
And by this, I think you were pointing at eGlass.
Yeah, I use this as my camera on my Zoom sessions.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
cool. So you've talked a little bit about the fact that were remote and then hybrid. And so, of course, hybrid is this blend of remote and being back in the classroom at times. What were some of your biggest challenges about, what happened last March, 13 months ago now?
Well, it was very sudden. So transitioning to all of the content is online and all of the content is available to students all the time. It was a very sudden transition. My school, our calendar got extremely lucky in that California was shut down the Friday that our 2-week spring break started. So we at least got a 2-week, figure it out before we go live again. And I'm also very lucky that at the school site I'm at, we work in highly coordinated teams. So as a team, we could kind of divvy up, okay, you're making the digital quizzes, you're making the digital homework. And it actually worked out pretty well, I thought, and has worked out pretty well. But I think the challenge the entire time has been engagement. What does engagement look like? If the students aren't attending the Zoom session or in person, are they still interacting with the material? How do I monitor that interaction? How do I see learning in this environment? And I think I was sort of apprehensive, and teachers are apprehensive. Well, they're just going to find the answers online. Like they can cheat on our tests now. And like that was what we're sort of concerned with. And what I've learned is I can really trust my students. Like the vast majority of them, yeah, they could go find answers online, but they're actually working pretty well. So I've been very impressed with my students and how much they've learned and how hard they've worked in this.
That's awesome. So we are partial to eGlass, of course, as a part of as a key part of schools' engagement strategies moving forward. And you are a new eGlass user. What, you got yours about 2 weeks ago?
Almost a month now, I think.
Oh, a month ago. But so the 12 months prior to that, what were what were some of your key arrows in your quiver for student engagement? What did your strategy, how did that evolve, and what did it look like kind of before you got eGlass?
Yeah, we used a lot of tools at my school site. We're one-to-one, so students already all had Chromebooks. We're pretty uniform in how we use our learning management system, which is Canvas. So for assessment, we were building online quizzes in Canvas, which we had experience with, and we know how to share those among the teachers. So that was the assessment part. For instruction, I was using, at first I started using a whiteboard in my house with just a webcam. But the glare and everything and the resolution didn't really work out. So I've been teaching in person. I've been using this for a few years now. I teach with an iPad, and I use an app called Explain Everything. And that allows me to write on the iPad. It worked well. I was actually using the Zoom whiteboard in the Zoom sessions. But I would kind of use a combination of Explain Everything and the Zoom whiteboard to not only do the live instruction, but I would also produce help videos, and we would link those help videos into the homework and onto like pages in our module for asynchronous support.
And those help videos were like content tutorials that you were producing and posting?
Yes, it was a combination of like summaries of the lesson, and then also like, here's me doing a specific problem. And then as a policy at our school, we record all of our Zoom sessions and post all previous Zoom sessions on our page in sort of this, we really synchronized very strictly in terms of all of our pages are set up the same way. All of our pre-recorded lessons are set up the same way, in the same place on the page. So, that's sort of what I use to deliver content. The key and the challenge I've found in hybrid learning is, well, how do I get the students doing math, not just watching me doing math? So I use tools like Desmos Activity Builder to have them engage with the math and see how they're doing. I use Pear Deck to make pages that they can write on that I can see. And
what's that one called?
Pear Deck, PEAR, and then DECK.
Okay.
It's kind of a cool application. It takes a Google slide presentation and it turns it into something that the students can write on. So I can kind of put up math problems, say, graph this line, and then I can see what all of the students are doing. So it's just a way to make it. I don't want to make my hour Zoom sessions be just me doing math in front of you for an hour. I want to see you engaging with the math. And it's cool too, because I can display their answers. So we can talk about, what adjustment would we make to this problem, or what are the difference between these two answers.
Gotcha. Cool. So now you're on, you've put these other great tools to use, and they will continue to be part of your engagement strategy. But now as an eGlass user, can you give us some examples and maybe even show us how you're using eGlass to engage your students and teach them, and maybe teach us a little math?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I think the thing that eGlass has done that's been really helpful is it allows, if I were to, I sort of put this into two categories: the tangible stuff that kind of makes sense as to why it helps students, and then there's sort of the intangible, which is the interpersonal connection. And I'll say that the tangible stuff that I'm going to share first, in my mind as a teacher, I'm like, oh, I can do these things, and this is how it helps my students. I think the most important thing eGlass does is, by seeing my face and my gestures with the content, it makes it more engaging and easier to watch. I've gotten responses from my students saying, Mr. Stewart, you got to start a YouTube channel. This is so good. Like, this is so much easier to watch. And when I think about it, I think the reason that's the case is, prior to using eGlass, when I was using just the Zoom whiteboard, I'm asking my students to look at a white screen for an hour. And it's a white screen with a cursor on it, and then hear my voice. And it's kind of like it's my entire body and my expressions versus just a cursor. Like, this is a much better visual and more engaging and easier to watch. So that's sort of the intangible part. I think there's probably some cognitive stuff going on there. Like, I'm reminded of like COVID nurses and COVID doctors who have the picture of their face on their jet. Like, there's something about seeing a person's face when they're speaking that I think does stuff that, it isn't really tangible. The tangible aspects in math are that I can use gesture, and gesture will help me convey movement that's implied. So an example is we were drawing angles to kind of build into trigonometry and the unit circle. So we would do things like draw an angle in the standard position. And that means that when I draw an angle, like let's say I'm going to draw 120 degrees, I have to show that in mathematics, the standard position and the convention is that the angle starts here at 0 degrees and it opens in a counterclockwise fashion going this way. And then I have to kind of mark off, okay, well, if I'm starting here at 0 degrees, 90 degrees would be perpendicular. So here's 90 degrees. And if I do 2 of those, I end up at 180 degrees. So we kind of have to talk about, well, where would 120 end up? So being able to do this motion is something that that I think really helps students. So I can then say, okay, here's my 120 degrees. So filling that out was super helpful. The different colors are obviously really helpful. And then when I do this, we were also doing something called reference angles. So we find the angle between the terminal side and the x-axis, and then we draw, in this case, this would be like a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. I apologize for any math errors I make. Feel free to call them out. But we were then talking about the sides of the 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So I would have to kind of draw, okay, here's our standard 30, 60, 90 right triangle that we talked about before. My short leg has a length of 1. I could say it's a length of 1. My long leg would have a length of √3. And my hypotenuse would have a length of 2. So here, the short leg would be this bottom side. So notice what I'm doing with my fingers. I'm pointing to 2 things at once. That's something that I can't do with a cursor. So these movements of like, these 2 things are the same. In this case, it would be -1. That's what we're teaching because we're on the negative part of the x-axis, and this would be positive √3, and then this we'd call this 2. And for anyone doing math, I know that we want to call that 1 at some point. We're getting to that later. But the ability to kind of point to 2 things, or if I'm taking something and plugging it in somewhere, we were doing summation notation. So we had series kind of represented with a summation notation, and we'd say something like, well, we're going to add up all the terms from n equals 1 to 15 in the arithmetic series described with this. So we want to figure out, well, what are those terms that we're adding up? I could kind of say, well, we're going to take this one here and plug it in. And I kind of want to point out that everything I just showed you, this is all stuff that I can do on a whiteboard, right? Like on a whiteboard, a traditional whiteboard, I can still model this. I think the difference for me with eGlass, and I got this from one of my students, because I said, guys, why do you like this better? And one of my students gave a really long description. He said, when I'm watching my teacher at a board, if I'm sitting in the wrong part of the room, I have to wait till my teacher moves to see what they wrote. And he said, if it takes too long, I don't understand it. Mm-hmm. So there's this lag between, okay, I'm hearing the teacher talk about what I want to try to understand, but I can't see it. And now I can see it. And now I have to put what I heard 5 seconds ago together with what I'm seeing produced up here. And I didn't get to see it being produced. So I think as teachers, we try to mitigate this by kind of learning to write like this, but right. He was saying that there was an effect there.
That's so powerful.
Yeah. So I'm thinking the fact that everything is in real time. You're seeing my face, you're seeing the movement, and you're hearing me talk about it all in real time at once. I think that does help students. It kind of helps convey meaning for the students in a way that, if there's a lag, it doesn't get conveyed either with my iPad or if they can't really see the board very well, writing on a whiteboard.
And presenting to us, a group of educational technologists and teachers, you're describing this kind of meta event that's happening, but you didn't have to teach your students to follow your gaze or your gesture, did you?
No.
Like it's intuitive. It's just the way humans interact.
Yeah. They look where I'm looking. They work where I'm pointing. So if I'm using this, they have to kind of know to look out for my little cursor, which is just this little arrow that appears on here, right? And I hope that they can see that my cursor is conveying the movement that I'm trying to convey. Mm-hmm. But for something like this, where I can talk about, like when we were doing sine and cosine, I had to talk about how, sine represents the relative side lengths, right? So if I'm doing sine of this angle here, I'm talking about the ratio of this length here divided by this length, right? So like the sine of 30 ends up being 1/2. This side is 1/2 of this side. But what's going to happen to this ratio as I go and I open this angle up? What's going to happen to that yellow side as I open that angle up? And if I open that angle up, that side you can see got longer, right? So as this angle gets bigger, the yellow side gets longer relative to the pink side. So if I have something like the sine of 70 degrees, that's closer to 1 because it's this side divided by this side. So being able to sort of model that with my hands. There's other tools I can use to do that. Like, for example, we were doing quadrantal angles here, which means like you can't draw a reference triangle because I'm finding the sine of 90 degrees. So I could go into GeoGebra and I use this model that models the movement around the unit circle in GeoGebra. But I also still needed to be able to do it with my hands because this is where the writing was. I can't put my writing over GeoGebra. So I can say, look at this animation we just saw in GeoGebra. As this angle increases, these two lines land right on top of each other and disappear. And I could kind of bring that motion into my instruction. And it kind of showed me that, like, I've been showing motion using Desmos and GeoGebra, but being able to show it here too and model it, I think is a meaningful change for the students.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just from our company's perspective, is that we're not interested in trying to convince people that we're replacing all the other tools you use. This is a complement to other great tools out there.
Yeah, and I mean, I've used GeoGebra, Desmos Activities, Pear Deck, Explain Everything. I've used a lot of different technologies, and this is sort of in a class of technologies in that this is designed for enhancing direct instruction, right? So it's not necessarily an interactive technology like Desmos Activity Builder or anything like that. What I've found, though, is that this has sort of been the easiest technology to adapt because I didn't change anything. This is the same lesson that I've been giving on this surface for 10 years now. It's the same lesson. All I changed is it's easier to watch. And I remember my first few days using the technology, I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? And after I made a couple of videos, I'm like, oh, all you have to do is make sure that your face isn't here where you're trying to show. That's pretty much it. Just make sure your face isn't there, and then you just give the same lesson you've been giving, and the technology makes it better. I didn't have to do anything to make it better.
Well, that's great. Last question, I think. What's your best piece of advice for other math and science teachers out there struggling with distance learning and hybrid, the move from distance to hybrid, and then the eventual, some will transition to fully back face-to-face, and then other districts, other teachers will maintain a hybrid approach for a long time to come. What's your a couple pieces of advice you might have for teachers struggling right now?
I've had to learn to I don't know, it's hard for me. I'm sort of new to it. So I'm trying to think where was I surprised? Where was I oh, that's not the way I thought it was. And the biggest surprise for me is assume the best in your students, right? Some of my students are cheating, but the vast majority of them aren't. And I sort of had to check my own assumptions. I'm just assuming, oh, they're just going to cheat on it. Really, no, they're not. I teach a course at San Diego State that goes over pedagogy and mathematics. And one of the lessons that we give every year in this class, because this was also online, the course I teach at San Diego State, one of the lessons we give is we have a student or a practicing teacher come in and give a lesson in Spanish. And as they give the lesson in Spanish, the Spanish speakers in the room have an advantage. And the people who don't speak Spanish are just trying to follow along. And I remember the teacher gave this lesson in Pear Deck, which is a tool I use. And I'm trying to keep up so that my screen has the correct work on it. And I'm like, can you please just show another student's answer? Because I don't understand the language. Can you just show the screen so I can copy? And if I can copy, I can understand it. And I remember when I had that feeling, I just felt like such a jerk, because in my Pear Decks, I was seeing that the students weren't writing anything until I displayed the answer. And in my mind, I was going, these little cheaters, they're not going to write anything down until I show the right answer. That's just because they're lazy. I'm like, no, they aren't lazy. They're struggling to keep up. And I don't see the students as lazy. And it took me experiencing that as a learner, where I have trouble understanding the language and I just want to keep up and write something, to really kind of put that in check. And I've kind of grown to respect my students a lot more in seeing how hard they've worked through this.
So assume the best in them, and then also exercise your empathy muscle.
Yes. Yeah. Exercise both with the students and with your coworkers. Give each other grace. A technology piece like this that might be easy for me to use, it might be a big ask for another teacher. And there might be something for another teacher that's really easy for them to use, and it's a big ask for me. So I've kind of had to learn, don't just assume, we're all going to use this tool now. No, you got to be patient, and just because another teacher might be reluctant to adopt the technology, it doesn't mean, they're a bad teacher. It's just, different people learn things at different paces.
Well, Will, this has been, the time has flown. We're going to wrap up now. And yeah. I thank you so much. Flashing back to some trig there. I think that's trigonometry, right? It's been a few years for me, but we've got some trig in there and some maybe some geometry too. But thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, thank you. Glad I can help.
And those of you having joined us online, thank you for joining us. We'll be back here next Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, for another installment of Help Learning Live. Thanks.